Now we're going to take a look at some of the different shape tools that we have available to us. Now these shape tools we're going to talk about in two different lessons. The first part will be the default shapes that come with Photoshop CS3, and then we'll talk about some of the custom ways we can create our own shapes. So I have just a brand new document here, and let's talk about some of the options. Now the shape tool is right here. You'll notice there's the rectangle tool by default and the rounded rectangle, which I use quite a bit, and we'll talk about some of these other options before we get into the custom shape tool. So with the rectangle tool selected, let's go through a couple of these options up here. Now we've seen these in another lesson that I've done already, and one of these is the make path. This one will make a path with a solid layer. So if I draw a rectangle, you'll notice something very unique. Right here at the edge, there is a line, and what this line represents is the actual path. So if I go and grab one of these, the direct selection tool here, you'll notice that I can actually pick this point up and move it. Okay, so that's one way of drawing. The next way is just to create just the path itself. So if I click and draw a path, you notice there's no fill, but again, I do have the ability to reshape and then fill this later. Okay, this could be used as a selection or pretty much anything I need a path for. Now the third way is just to create the pixels, and you're going to see that my tool says nope, I can't do that. Well, let's take a look at the layers real quick. If I come over here, you notice that in this layer I already have a whole bunch of stuff going on here. It automatically made a new layer for us for this top part, and it just added this to the selection. So let's create a brand new layer that's empty, and you'll notice now when I come out here inside of my workspace, I can click and drag and actually create a pixelated or a pixel filled shape. Now what's the difference? Well, these two shapes here are vectors, meaning that I can reshape them at any time. And let's just go and select that layer. There we go. I can reshape this at any time, and it's going to be super crisp and 100% perfect. However, this guy, once I start to reshape it, I'm going to blur the edge. So depending on what you're trying to create, you may have one need over another. Now, if you're not for sure how to use the layers palette, that's okay. We're going to get into that, and I'll go through all of the options. So you can jump forward to one of those lessons if you'd like. So that's the two ways of creating these paths. So let's take a look at what some of these other options do. Well, we can go ahead and activate the first option here, which will create the fill with a path. And if we activate this pen, you'll notice that this new option shows up, which is auto add and delete. So what I can do is come over here and add a point, and then automatically come over here. Let me just select this. All these points up here. If I bring my pen near here, you notice I add a point. If I bring my pen near one of these points that already exists, I get a little minus sign, and it will delete the point. Okay. So pretty useful depending on what you're trying to create. Now there are a couple of other options, and that if I turn off this auto add and delete, I have a couple of these options over here, which is add to shape, subtract, intersect, expand, and we've played with these already. But if I set this to add to shape, and I come over here and I add these two together, what I can do is with my path selection tool, select both my paths, and let's choose add, and we can hit combine, and we're good to go. So now these are all one piece. Okay. However, if I grab my, let's say, subtract tool and subtract out this piece, you notice how wherever I drew, I have now subtracted that element. I can also do an intersection and say only keep what's under my mouse. So now it's only going to keep that area. Mind you, this one down here is an old one that we don't want. Okay, so we have a lot of things going on, and this is a live system, so you can, as you can see, as I move it around, it gets updated. Okay, I can come in here and subtract this. So it's a pretty neat system of creating these elements. Now, one more piece that you see over here is this style. So to demonstrate that, let me get rid of some of my garbage here that I've created. I'll just throw these away and create a brand new layer. Okay. And I'm going to draw out one shape that's just this solid color. And then over here next to styles, you can see I have all of these styles that we'll create in here, and I'll show you this later. But I can draw these out and we can pick different styles, and they're just going to update automatically, so that's really nice. Okay, and I can unhook them or hook them, and we'll talk about these later when we get into the palettes. Now, one option that I do want to show you is this little arrow right here. And this arrow represents different modifications for these tools. So what we've got here is a way of creating, let's say, a perfect square. So now no matter how I drag out, it's just like if I held down Shift. Okay? Or we want it maybe a specific size, or we want to do it, let's say, a 4:3 proportion to match something like NTSC. We can draw it from the center, so as I draw it out, you see how it comes out like that. Let me turn off my style here, so it's a little bit easier to see. So we have a couple of these options. So I'll just say unconstrained to reset it. But if we choose a different tool, like this rounded rectangle, not only do I have these options, but now I also have this new option that says radius. So now if I click and drag, you'll notice I'll get these nice, pretty rounded corners. And you can control that with this radius. So depending on what you're creating, not only will you have options, and sometimes you'll get rid of options, okay, but some tools will have these sub options as well as how you want the radius to be drawn. So if I turn on, let's say, this polygon option star, I'm going to have 5 sides. Now when I draw this out, I get a great looking star. If I turn that off, that's the difference. Okay, and we have full control how to indent that, how to smooth it. If we smooth out the corners, you'll see it becomes a rounded, fun star like a kid star. So you can have a lot of fun creating these shapes. Now, lastly, what I want to talk about, let me just get rid of all my stuff here that I've made. I'm just going to shift select them all and take them to the trash can. The last one that I want to talk about is the line tool. Now, with the line tool, initially you have a weight. Okay, so if I click and drag, you're going to get something like this. If I adjust the weight down to, let's say, 1 pixel, I get a very small line. Okay, let me just get this out of the way. I do have some options, though. And I've got either a start and end arrowhead. So if I click and drag, okay, let me just make this bigger so it's easier for you to see. Okay, so those are my start and end arrows. And then you have a choice of you want to have the width of this. I have it set to 500% of the width of this number right here. So if I set this number to 10, this is going to be 500% of the size of this piece here. And the length is going to be 1,000%. So depending on what you're trying to create, let's set this to 500. Now my height and width will be proportional. And you can see that the width here is the same as the length. Okay, right here. And then this concavity controls how this arrow angles in. So if I crank this up, let's say to 50% and draw, you see that arrow right there on the back side? However, if I crank this the other way, I get this shape. So it controls how this area is represented. Now that's just a quick and easy overview of the line tool and the shape tool. Next, I want to talk about custom shapes and how we can make our very own custom shapes to add to the system.